I was badly burned. I was 17 and a half, 70% of my body, almost 3 years in hospital. And, it's not just the burns, it's the pain, it's the hospital. By the way, with burns, it doesn't stop. There are things that last. So maybe a good way to introduce this is the fact that I have half a beard. So the people who can see us can see that I have half a beard, and the question is why. And really, there are kind of a few reasons behind this, and you'll see how it connects. If you think about distress, what can we do? What do we want to do? And what we want to do is we want to find a story. We want to explain it. We have a tremendous pressure to find the story. And by the way, if you show people images of random dots, black, white, gray dots, and you say, do you see a pattern here? The more stressed they are, the more likely they are to see patterns. We have this incredibly important drive to try and have control by finding patterns. And it could be in a picture, it could be understanding that, this is actually, this is the reason this bad thing is happening to me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to the Bounce Podcast. Just a quick, interesting tidbit. 2 days ago from me recording this intro, there's a new television detective drama that just premiered on NBC called The Irrational. And it stars Jesse Martin as a psychology professor, Alec Mercer. And that character is based on Dan Ariely, a real-life behavioral psychologist, and who happens to be my guest on this episode of the podcast. And the premise and a lot of the themes woven through the show come from Dan's best-selling book, some of you might have read, called Predictably Irrational, where Dan refutes the common assumption that we behave in fundamentally rational ways. Dan is the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. He's dedicated his life to answering questions that help people live more sensible, if not rational, lives. His interests span a wide range of behaviors, and his sometimes unusual experiments are consistently interesting, amusing, and informative, demonstrating profound ideas that often fly in the face of common wisdom. He is also a 3-time New York bestselling author. His books include the one I just mentioned, Predictably Irrational, also The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, Irrationally Yours, and a great book, Payoff, which is about motivation. And now his latest book called Misbelief, What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things, which is also the touchstone of this particular podcast. So on the show, I talk with Dan about his life story, his burn injuries, how they shaped his life and sent him on the path of social sciences and behavioral psychology. Dan explains his half beard. If you've seen any of his TED Talks or just go on the internet, you can kind of see pictures of him. And his unique insights into self-acceptance. And we delve into the mechanisms of irrationality in human behavior. Then we define misbelief and talk about his book a bit and its distinction from a lie, with the transition from personal to societal misbeliefs highlighted by a public accusation incident, which is part of the book. And he kind of backtracks and tells me that story. And we discuss the misbelief funnel, identifying false comprehension through a true-false belief test that's in the book I found interesting, gauging confidence and analyzing belief origination. And then we talk about the appeal of heterodoxy in politics, why people are attracted to it, the negative consequences of rejecting and ostracizing people with crazy beliefs. Dan explains the shibboleth and how it applies in the use of communication as a signal for identity and even loyalty, rather than the pursuit of truth. And then we talk about the factors that lead to belief alteration, belief creation, as it were. And then we take a turn, it's very interesting, we discuss motivation. Since I had him on the podcast, I want to talk about his book, Payoff. And then some interesting discussions around the discrepancy between anticipation regarding task motivation and exploration of how effort imbues work with meaning. So I think you'll enjoy that as well. Dan was a great guest, very generous with his time. One note on the audio, there is an occasional odd printer-like sound you might hear in the background. So my apologies. Dan happened to be in LA on a trip related to the new TV show. So He joined the call from a hotel room. So all that said, here's Dan. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Lovely to be here.
I want to kind of get into the book via some of your background. You had, if you don't mind talking about it, you had this life-altering ordeal at 17 where you suffered severe burns. There was an explosion of some sort, and you had third-degree burns about 70% of your body. And please correct me where I'm wrong. And you spent many years in and out of the hospital and treatments. It's my understanding this event, this horrific event, shaped your perspective and got you into behavioral economics. Is that right? Do I have that wrong?
It got me into lots of things. I was badly burned. I was 17 and a half, 70% of my body, almost 3 years in hospital. And, it's not just the burns, it's the pain, it's the hospital. By the way, with burns, it doesn't stop. There are things that last. So maybe a good way to introduce this is the fact that I have half a beard. So the people who can see us can see that I have half a beard, and the question is why. And really, there are kind of a few reasons behind this, and you'll see how it connects. So the first reason is that the right side of my face is badly burned, so I just don't have hair on this side, just all scars. But of course, I could shave the left side of my face, and I don't. So why am I picking this very strange look? So starking in the asymmetry. And the story is that for many years I shaved. Actually, until 6 years ago, I shaved. So this is relatively new, and I shaved. And then about 6 years ago, I went on a month-long hike. I didn't see myself. I didn't shave. And at the end of this month-long hike, I looked sort of like this. A little bit less white, but sort of like this. And when I looked myself in the mirror for the first time, I didn't like this look. It's a very strange look. And I thought I'll certainly shave it, but I thought I will keep it going for maybe a few more weeks just as a memory of the hike. So I kept it going, and I posted a few things on social media. And to my surprise, I got a few people who thanked me for the half a beard. Why did they thank me for the half a beard? These were people who were struggling with their own injuries. They felt they were trying to hide something, and they thought that I was doing this on purpose. Look how much I don't care. So when I got these notes from people, I thought to myself, okay, if it's like a public service announcement, if some people are finding comfort in this, look how much I don't care, maybe I will keep this half a beard for a bit longer. But the really surprising thing for me happened 4 months down the line. Where 4 months down the line, I all of a sudden feel that my attitude toward my scars is different. I have a lot of deformities, lots of things are wrong with me. And I started feeling that this is not me against the scars, but it's kind of the story of my life. I started feeling less antagonistic to the scar and more they were part of me, part of my story. And, I've been burned for a very long time. And I started wondering, what is this process? And I think it was all about stopping shaving. And here's my analysis. So imagine that somebody like me shaves. I wake up in the morning, and then I have no hair on one side and stubble on the other side. And the act of shaving also makes me less non-symmetrical. So the act of shaving is also an act of hiding my asymmetry. It's an act of hiding my injury. And stopping doing that, I think, was very healthy for self-acceptance. Now, outside of this story about saying, what are the actions that we do that are actually not good for us? What are the things that we do maybe that are, without thinking, actually make it more difficult for me in this case? There's also the question of social science. So here I am, a social scientist. I'm supposed to understand these forces. But the fact is I didn't. In fact, for many years I shaved. And if you ask me, 7 years ago, Dan, how would it feel like to be with half a beard? I would say day one would be terrible. People would ask questions, kid would point, maybe people would laugh, all kinds of things would happen. But I have nothing in my arsenal of intuitions that would say that 4 months down the line, it would actually increase my ability to self-accept. And I think this is actually the role of social science, is to basically say there are some things our intuitions are correct about, like how would one with half a beard look like? But there's some things that our intuition is not so good about. And the role of social science is to illuminate those things and to give us little hints for how we should live our lives. So that's a story of facial hair, half a beard, and social science.
So this kind of small change in your kind of routine, or you notice after the fact, some sort of broader self-acceptance. I just read about someone who was, I think he was a bodybuilder and he competed, but your story just brought this to mind. And he was always dieting, cutting the body fat down to very minimal, and it was very difficult for him. And he retired or paused his career. I don't remember the details there, but he did, for a period of about a month, took all the mirrors away out of his house. And it had something to do with this body shaming, or that's not the word, but he was always evaluating himself because that was habit when you compete. And what's interesting, he said he was never happier. And I'm thinking to myself, that is very interesting, but also that would be difficult. I was thinking for myself, difficult, not because I love looking at myself. Maybe I do or don't, I don't know, but just, making sure everything's okay. But anyway, it's related, but not exactly the same. But that's interesting, right?
Yeah. The question of, self-awareness, evaluation of the self, actions that are counterproductive, this is all interesting. And it's a process. It's a process that takes a while, and we're not set up to think about what would happen after a while.
So the reason I wanted to mention your story is there may be people hearing who have similar challenges or gone through similar traumas or what have you. But tell me because occasionally you would respond, we would go back and forth emailing, and you were great in your response. But occasionally you would send me a voice reply saying, "Hey, forgive the reply," and it would be an audio attached. But is that because of your injuries, and does that affect your typing? And do you type? I'm just curious.
So my hand is very bad. This is the only movement I have with my right hand.
Oh, okay. I did not know.
So what I do to type is I actually have to close my hand and have one finger, but the pressure on the fingers holding them in is very tough. So I can type about a page and a half a day, slowly, but that's what I can do. And if I do more than that, I don't sleep at night from pain. Now, technology has made things much, much better. Voice recognition and so on. So I think, technology helps everybody. I think it is at the side of the people with disability to a higher degree in many ways. But so I had somebody who wrote for me a little software that with one button records, one press saves, attaches, and mails the email. It creates other complexities, but I try to do the voice to text. And I think it's kind of nicer to do it for other people, to send text rather than voice, because sometimes people are in a shared space and so on. I do realize that sending audio is helping me and demanding on other people. So I try to use voice to text, but I realize that there are sometimes errors that happened that really change things. And also somehow my sense of humor doesn't really work without the intonation.
Yeah, I guess Dan, it would have to be, the voice to text had to be so good that you wouldn't have to correct by typing, right? But Dan, you've written a lot of books. Did you type those? I'm just curious.
So I do a mix, but okay. There's a really interesting secret for productivity, which is to work every day. Yeah, B.F. Skinner, the famous psychologist, used to have a rule. And his rule was that he comes to the office and he writes 700 words or so before he does anything. And 700 words seems achievable, right? Seems doable. Why not? Everybody can do that. But then if you think about it, a book is, let's say, 70,000 words. So if you write 700 words a day, it means in 100 days, you'll have a book. The key to productivity is just work. Even if you only work, if I can type a little bit every day, it's the every day that counts. If people wait for the muse to strike and so on, it's tougher. And somebody like me with with a disability, the everyday is important. But of course, I use every method known. I have a wonderful assistant. She takes some audio. I do use some of the software. I used Otter a little bit. I'm using some other ones. I use everything. And the variety also helps me a lot. So I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, give my hand the rest. And that's how I try to. I also work many hours to compensate.
So let's talk about misbelief, Dan, in your new book. So if I were to define misbelief as simply saying it's a false belief or believing in something that's not true, am I right? Is that that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I would say that it's partially, but it's not enough. So let's I'll tell you what I think is important for the definition. I think for me, the definition describes something about the external world, but also something about the internal world. So it's a belief in something that is not an acceptable truth by the experts and the majority and so on. That's part one. But as important is that it's a perspective of the person in which this misbelief is central to them. It's a central tendency to them. And they use it to view the world around them. Let's take an example. So I'm now in California. If I basically say, I think kale is not as healthy as people think. Let's say I'm going against the grain, certainly in California. That's a holding a minority opinion, maybe a wrong opinion, but I wouldn't call it a misbelief. Something would become a misbelief if it becomes a central theme in my life, something that I hold very intensely in a dear way, from which I view the rest of life. So, for example, if I'm either a die-hard Republican or a die-hard Democrat, and I hold a minority opinion on each one of those sides, and I view everything in that regard. If I think that the Twin Towers did not really fall, that it was a conspiracy by the CIA, it's not just a minority opinion, it's something that I use as a central theme to look at life through that. And now it's not just about the opinion, it's about the way I process information about other things as well.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. Let's say I believe that the world is flat. That's false. I would assume that qualifies. But based on what you just said, it makes me think that I have to build something else on top of that belief or act in a way based on that belief for it to be a misbelief. Am I misunderstanding?
That's right. So if you just say, I think the world is flat, but I don't really care so much, and it's it's fine either way.
It's something I'm not going to fight about.
That's right.
Is that okay? That helps,
because now it's not a central theme in your world. But the moment it becomes a central theme in your world, it becomes much more about just the world is flat. It becomes the fact that the government is misleading us, and it's about the fact that they're hiding some information, and it's about the intention of why this is happening. And there's lots of people who know. One of the interesting thing about the world is flat belief is that lots of people have to be in the know. Every pilot, every person at NASA, there's lots of people that are in the know, and it's a bigger story than that. So regular skepticism is not a misbelief. If you say, look, everybody thinks the world is round, maybe they're wrong. Okay, that's skepticism, that's perfectly fine. For it to become a misbelief, it needs to be a very important tenet, and then it includes much more than just that specific fact.
There's some either worldview or use of the belief, it seems. In other words, so I can have the false belief that the world is flat, but it doesn't become misbelief until I'm putting it into some action into my life and decisions that I make and the people I hang or whatever.
Yeah. Until it becomes a central theme in your life and a perspective from which you view everything else.
It starts with something that's false, but then it becomes something bigger than that. So the reason you wrote this book, or you were kind of catapulted into some social media attack Is that right? You woke up one day and there was a bunch of threads directed at you, and you have over 100,000 or so, right? Almost 200,000 followers on Twitter, don't you? Something like that. By the way, there's a story that you were in a cafe or something, and two people came in and yelled that you were a murderer. I mean, I hear tweet storms, but this is a whole nother level.
Oh yeah. So the story is actually a kind of an unbelievable shift in my well-being, because as COVID started, this was maybe one of the highlights of my academic life.
This 2020? 2020?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, early 2020. And it's one of the highlights of my academic life. Why? Because I feel unbelievably useful. I have two phones and my computer, and people call me from companies and governments. And, there's a virus, but there's a lot of social science questions. How do we get people to think about the new rules? And how do we do distant education? And how do we reduce domestic violence?
We have remote work, Zooms.
And I think all of us, by the way, not just me, I think all the social scientists were kind of in very high demand, lots of interesting questions. Should we go give fines? Should government fine people, or should they give them rewards? Big fines, small fines, lots of really important questions. Anyway, I work day and night, only COVID. I feel that I'm incredibly useful. I all these
That's
unbelievable
cool. Yeah.
people call me this. And then within that, I get this email from somebody I once helped, and she says, "Dan, what's wrong with you?" And I answer jokingly, "What's wrong with me?" And she sent me this set of links, and I'll just describe one of them. One of them has a video in which it shows pictures from me in hospital, real pictures. And it goes on to describe how, because of my injury, I started hating healthy people. And that's why I joined the cabal, Bill Gates, the Illuminati, in an effort to kill as many healthy people as possible. Now, it's a 90-second video. And as a story, it's very compelling, right? Here's a story of the creation of a villain. Anyway, I follow the other links, and I discover that there's a bunch of people who think that I'm just an awful, awful person. And I start trying to fix their impression. So I call some of them up, I invite some of them to talk, I join online discussion groups, I join some forum on Telegram. And as you know from the book, I fail miserably. So I spent about a month, a very unproductive month, and a very painful month. And then I admit failure. I should have admitted it earlier, but I'm a slow learner. And for the next 2 years, I basically sit back and try not to take anything personally. I get almost daily death threats. I actually got one today. I haven't got one in a while, but for the first 2 years, I got them almost daily.
Well, the one today or recent, is it still around the COVID, around the pandemic?
Yeah, still around.
And Dan, just I want to make sure you were part of some cabal or something where was it? I know you mentioned it, but I still kind of confused.
They basically accused me for being the central consciousness architect for the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm sorry. Wow.
So on one hand, on one hand, it's a big credit, right? But I got people who were telling me that they're burning my books. I got people who
you're the James Bond level villain.
Yes.
If it's
I was. Yeah, it was a high level appointment. Some people in PR said, "Look, they're putting you in good company. Bill Gates, the Illuminati, don't fight it, accept it."
But you did take it personally at first.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to wonder what I would feel if somebody accused me of something so outlandish. I mean, part of me thinks it's so outlandish that it doesn't impact me. But then again, if they're taking things I'm saying out of context and spreading misinformation, that hurts.
That's right. Somebody is controlling the narrative. Somebody is dictating what you do. And the world looks very frightening because you say to yourself, how is it happening that these people have this interpretation of me and there's nothing I can do to fix it? the helplessness and the confusion and the worry are really very intense. And there were two things about that period. One is that there's a concept in social science called scarcity mindset. That concept is usually used with poverty. And the concept is basically saying that people who are very poor, part of their cognitive capacity at all time is dedicated to figure out how they're going to deal with money. Will I be able to pay rent? Will I be able to pay for medications? And they can't use their whole cognitive capacity to deal with whatever they're dealing, your conversation with you, whatever. In the back of their mind, some of it is preoccupied all the time with that. And I certainly felt like that during the days where I felt that my IQ has dropped, that part of my mind was constantly occupied with, is this little beep I just heard another death threat? Is there somebody else after me? Some of my mind was preoccupied to some degree the whole day. And then at night, of course, that was the worst. Nightmares, worrisome thoughts.
Where's this going? Yeah, like what's the end game of it? Yeah.
I had this recurring dream where I would figure out that I'm traveling the world to look for a place with less hate. I never found one in the dream. So that's period one. And then period two, I basically try to make sense of this. And, I say, I'm a social scientist. And my tools is to try and understand human nature. And I basically start observing, listening, paying attention. And I also talk to about 20 diehard misbelievers. And I talked to them over the next 2 years in a very intense way to try and understand their life, where they come from, how if they constructed their world. So I kind of use research in psychology, my observation, these individuals, and I basically try to stitch together what I call the funnel of misbelief, which is basically the machinery, the complex machinery that takes people and slowly over time moves them to become misbelievers. And we all have these people in our lives. We all have people in our lives that, 5 years ago, you said to yourself, oh, we're just the same. And now you're saying, I don't understand what has happened. What is the transition? And what is obvious is that this transition is not because they're not intelligent and not because they're not wonderful human beings and so on, but something did happen. And this is the book is really about this funnel of misbelief and the psychological forces that can work on anybody. Like it's easy to say, oh, it's these other people, but no, they could work on us as well and help us understand what happened to them, what could happen to us, and a little bit of what we can do about it. And maybe one metaphor is to think about a cookie. So, a cookie was designed to tap our psychology in a way that would cause us to want to eat cookies and not be able to stop. Salt, sugar, fat. The funnel of misbelief is a much more complex machinery. It has many more elements than just taste, but it's also these devices that have been created to basically make it very easy to start questioning our basic beliefs, adopt alternative ones until we become real misbelievers.
So for your personal experience and the sleepless nights and this worry, and I can't imagine people just spinning stories about me, the impact that would have. But when you switched mood from this is horrible and worrying about it and what the hell's going on, you said you then got curious and you started investigating why people believe this. Was that helpful from a resilience standpoint to flip that to being in this victim, which you were, but then becoming an investigator of what was happening? Did that help your mental state, if I'm making sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The realization of that struck me later in the process, but you're absolutely right. When we talk about the funnel of misbelief, you'll see that it's a process that people adopt to gain some control. And the process for me of investigating and trying to understand and so on was a process of trying to gain control. So yes, it was It was dysfunctional from the perspective that I stayed in that very toxic environment for an extra 2 years. But it was very, very functional from the perspective of giving me a sense I'm not a victim.
Well, I don't know. Was it? I mean, exposure therapy is very effective. I just think that's a great lesson to cull from this, that flipping to this investigative, what's going on? Because I've experienced a lot of grief here in the last few years of my life with people that I've lost. But investigating grief, Dan, or learning more about it and that whole process has been very, very healing.
Yeah. Feeling helpless and without control is a terrible, terrible psychological state. So anything we can do to gain a sense of control is very, very helpful. Absolutely.
By the way, I think that's a point in your book, Payoff, too, about motivation, is this whole thing of having controls. All right, so how the hell does this happen?
So we already covered the first part in some way, because the funnel of misbelief has 4 components: stress, emotions.
Okay, hey, I'm sorry, Dan. You talk about the funnel of misbelief. So I've never. That's a very unique way of presenting. Yeah. Is that a path? We're talking about a path from normal beliefs to this craziness. Okay.
And it's important to think about it as a funnel because it gets worse as we get deeper and deeper into it.
Great. Thank you for mentioning it.
So the building block, the building grounds for this is stress. And you'll see in a second what it is. The second component is cognitive. The third is personality. And then the thing that seals the deal is the social element. Let's dive a little bit into the first part, which is stress. And in some way, we talked about it because we talked about my stress. But imagine the stress that we're talking about is not the stress of, gee, I'm really busy. It's the stress of feeling hard done by. I don't understand why the world is like this. I don't understand why I'm not getting my share. Grief is a good example. You think about people that their faith is being tested. There are things in life where you say, I don't understand the world. Why? Maybe it's like I feel like Job a little bit. Why is the world against me like this? So now, if you think about this stress, what can we do? What do we want to do? And what we want to do is we want to find a story. We want to explain it. We have a tremendous pressure to find the story. And by the way, if you show people images of random dots, black, white, gray dots, and you say, do you see a pattern here? The more stressed they are, the more likely they are to see patterns. We have this incredibly important drive to try and have control by finding patterns. And it could be in a picture, it could be understanding that, this is actually, this is the reason this bad thing is happening to me. So people are stressed. They want an answer. And not just they want an answer, they want an answer with the villain. Why? It's a bad thing that is happening to me. It can't be that God is the answer. It has to be a villain. And the moment it's a villain, it's their fault. It's not me anymore. And the third interesting component for this is that it's better if the story is complex. Why? Because that gives you a sense of control. If you say the story is simple, the story is simple. But if the story is complex, you say, I'm not an underdog. I'm actually one of the few people who understand what is really going on here.
Is there any effort in figuring that complexity out as part of the pull into it?
That's right. And of course, it has some other nice elements. Other elements, like there's a reason to go back into it. The little components can increase and so on. The more complex the story is, it can become a life ambition. It can fulfill you in a much deeper way than if it's something simple. So we have a need for a story, a need for a villain, and a need for a complex story. And now people find it.
But let's look at this particular happen with the pandemic. All of these things, the stress, the government rules or the lockdowns, you got to do this, you got to do that. Some people lost their jobs or businesses. So the stress is enormous.
And our mind does not separate the source of the stress. So let's say that people have stress because of their kids and because of their work. The mind kind of combines them both, right? By the way, the same thing is true for pain. If you are anxious and you have pain, your pain is higher. Like let's say you're anxious about, let's say you're in hospital and you're not sure how you're going to pay the bills. That adds to the physical pain from your broken leg. So things accumulate in ways that we don't exactly understand. And of course, pandemic creates lots of conditions for stress. Now, one of the antidotes for stress is resilience and having social support. And guess what? We had less social support in the pandemic. As a society, by the way, we are losing resilience. As income inequality increases, as people become more self-reliant, resilience drops and stress increases. So anyway, that's the starting. And now we have people, a lot of them, who are basically saying, here's the beginning of a story about what could happen and who is responsible and why my share is not as good as I thought it would. The next component is the cognitive component. And in the cognitive component, there's two elements. The first one everybody understands is that we get to choose the media that we want to choose. So if you decide to watch NBC or Fox News, you get a choice of which one you choose, and you get exposed to one world rather than the other. We don't get exposed to everything. We get to choose what's called confirmation bias.
And you have YouTube and you have channels, Alex Jones, you have a variety of media nowadays. There's niches for everybody.
There's niches for everybody. And in some sense, it is better to have those channels like Alex Jones than to think about YouTube. Why? Because YouTube could eventually get you to, I don't know if Alex Jones is on YouTube, but let's just say that whatever it is.
I don't think so, but
the social media channels can get you to go to one direction versus another by the choices you make, but you haven't made that active choice. So you don't even know that you chose A over B.
Yeah, the algorithm will serve up something.
That's right. If you choose Fox over NBC, you know you chose Fox. If you use social media and you get Fox, you don't know that you chose Fox. There's a difference there. But the other thing about the cognitive component is that it's not just a selection. It's not just that we have a broad range and we pick what we want to watch. We have a tremendous capacity to reframe things in a way that we want to see them. And the general term for this is motivated reasoning. There's a way we want to see the world, and we are going to keep on seeing the world in that way. So just as an example, imagine that you're a fan of football team X, and they're playing against football team Y, their biggest rival, and the referee is calling a call against your team. You can't help but see the referee as being evil, vile, blind, something. It's not that you choose. You can take the same thing and two very different people with different goals would see it in different ways, right? And that's the second component, which is actually much harder to deal with. We think, if we just saw the facts. No. We can see the same fact and interpret it very, very, very differently. Then the next component is personality. And, with stress, there are things we can do. With the cognitive parts, there are things we can do. With personality, it's not easy to change personality. But there are people who are slightly more susceptible than others to go down the funnel of misbelief.
You mentioned in the book obsessive compulsive disorder as a metaphor for the funnel. Can you explain that?
So the idea of the obsessive compulsive disorder goes back to the stress component. And here's the idea. Imagine that I think about going out from the house, but I feel uncomfortable in how I look. So we said that doing something that makes you feel in control helps. So maybe I wash my hands. I feel more comfortable, and I leave the house. Next time I'm about to leave the house, I said, what did I do last time to make me feel comfortable? I said, let me wash my hands and I'll feel better about it. And washing hands doesn't really affect how comfortable I feel with myself, but it's like a short-term remedy for getting the courage to get out of the house and feel good about myself.
I'm getting a reward each time
That's right. Now, let's think about somebody stressed. Somebody's worried about their kid and school and COVID and whatever. And they don't wash their hands, but they watch a video about Soros, whatever. Now, this person doesn't feel well, and now they have somebody else to blame. At the moment, they feel slightly better. Why? Because they deflect blame, it's somebody else, they understand the world in a better place, they feel a bit better. But over the long term, now they feel worse and worse and worse. Why? Because now their world is actually worse. Now they think that there's an evil entity out to get them in all kinds of ways. But next time they say, oh, I don't feel well today. What did I do yesterday? Oh, I watched the video about George Soros. Let me watch it again. So with the hand washing with obsessive compulsive disorder, it helps a little bit every time, and we get dependent on it. With videos, every time they give you a slight increase, but then a slow decrease in well-being. Slight increase, slow decrease, slight increase, slow decrease. And
would the increase be because I'm figuring this out?
Exactly. I'm figuring it out, I'm in control, and somebody else is to blame. But if you buy this view, then you say, oh my goodness, the world is a terrible place. There are awful people out there that are really out to get me. One of the maybe trivial but important insights I had was I realized at some point how difficult the life is for the misbelievers. If people believe in God, God is generally good. Sometimes there's a devil, but mostly God is good and you feel supported. If you're a misbeliever, you think the world is an awful place with all kinds of people who are out to get you in all kinds of difficult and complex ways, right? And it's not that they just come at you. No, they have all kinds of ways and they control things and there's a cabal and they smuggle kids. And you wake up in the morning and you feel that there's people out there that are trying to destroy you and your kids. And it's a very, very tough way to live.
Are you saying that through that lens that they see the world, they're seeing that at the grocer, at the store, at the mall, it's everywhere?
That's right. And that's part of the issue is that the moment you adopt it as a framework. I was on some radio show a few days ago, and after that somebody wrote to me about the salmonella poisoning. And that was somebody who thought that salmonella poisoning was intentional. Now, you and I read in the news about salmonella poisoning, and it's terrible. I don't know if you ever had it. I had it once. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. But we say, somebody messed up. There was some mistake. I hope they'll fix it, and so on. This person, that he was sure that this was intentional, right? Now think that every time there's a mistake out there, these people are basically saying, this is not a mistake. This is intentional. Somebody's out to get me, and here's another evidence for that.
So I tend to go with Occam's razor. If something bad happens, I look for the fewest assumptions in a way. It's a mental model, right? So if there's competing hypotheses or explanations, I look for the one with the fewest assumptions, and it's usually correct, right? But because you mentioned earlier about complexity being an attractant or something, but we have to go back because we're talking about personalities in these people. So this person, did you know this person with the salmonella? I'm just curious about the person now that you didn't know. No.
This was somebody who heard me talk on this radio show about misbelief. This person thinks I'm wrong and that they're actually bad actors and gave me this example of salmonella.
What about the salmonella?
As a proof.
Okay.
As a proof that, there are people out to get us. But if we finish the metaphor about OCD, the similarity with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and watching conspiracy videos is the short-term rewards that people get from it. And then the dependency and the repeated behavior, because then you start to depend on that. The difference is that hand washing is the same every time. Watching videos change. It expands, it gets bigger, it leads to another video. So it becomes a bigger and bigger part of people's lives.
Like a hobby to some degree. Then it's like they're building a scaffolding of belief and frameworks, and maybe it's a puzzle piece that they're looking for the key or something.
I think that the term hobby doesn't capture the corrosive nature of that. Hobby makes me think positive, but I think it becomes obsessive. It becomes a need. It becomes a need to do. It becomes something that comforts them, but in a way that creates short-term comfort and long-term deterioration.
You're close to talking about addiction. It's not that it is, but it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, right?
So let's jump to personality for a minute, because
let's do that, because you mentioned a narcissist personality.
So think about this issue that we had with pressure and stress and stories, and you say, what kind of people stress would be more effective on them? What kind of people would be looking more for stories? What kind of people? So one of the first one is people who trust their intuitions. You hear a story, and the question is, do you accept it because it just sounds right, or do you question yourself?
Hang on a second. Hang on. So is it a fairly accurate definition or definition of a narcissist as one who...
No, this is not narcissist yet. We're not at narcissist. We're in a different...
Good, all right. Different I conflated.
Yeah,
sorry, Dan.
We are now... We'll talk about a couple of attributes, but the first one is whether you basically accept things that look right or whether you question yourself. So there's a little math problem that we use. So here it is. It's not difficult, but here it is. A baseball bat and a baseball ball cost together $1.10. A baseball bat and a baseball ball cost together $1.10. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. The bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now, don't answer. But what happens when we give this question to people? Almost everybody has the answer 10 cents jump to their mind. And some people just say 10 cents. And some people question themselves. Some people said, well, if it's 10 cents for the ball and the bat is $1 more than the ball, the bat will be $1.10. 10 cents plus $1.10, it's $1.20. But you said that the bat and the ball cost together $1.10. So each of them needs to be 5 cents more. So maybe it's 5 cents and $1.05. Yes, that works. Now, not a complex math problem. Everybody can solve it. But the question is, do people trust their initial answer as the answer, or do they check themselves? And it turns out that if you said 10 cents, if you would have said 10 cents out loud, you would be more likely to just follow your gut intuition and therefore be a bit more likely to be a misbeliever. By the way, there's some good things about following your intuitions and so on, but in this case, it's not just good. So that's one attribute. Do we take something that seems right and don't even question it and just go with our trust in it? Another one is basically connecting dots, right? We said that there's a stress, and it turns out that people who connect more dots, people who are creative, that see patterns in things, are also more likely to go down the path of misbelief. And then the third attribute, and there's a couple of others, but these are the important one, is narcissists. Now, when we say narcissists, people think like, oh, these like clinical, really strong narcissists. No, think about people who are just slight narcissists. Is every increase in narcissism also make it more likely that people would adopt this alternative views? And the answer is yes. Now, why is that? Narcissists like to be rewarded in a positive way by the world. They like it when the world is kind to them, when people say you're wonderful and so on, and they get positive feedback. What happens when they don't get positive feedback? What happens when they stress? They are even more motivated than other people to find an answer. They're more motivated to find a villain and so on. So it increases their pressure to find an alternative narrative with a villain to blame.
Right. The motivation to find something is for their validation,
right.
Not...
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. So if they have stress, their pressure is higher than if they don't have it. Now, just to be clear, their personality is just part of it. You know, if somebody is saying, oh, I'm not a narcissist and I check my intuition, I'm immune. No, you're not immune. It makes it more likely that these people would go down the funnel of misbelief, but it's by itself, the personality is not enough. It's just another element that makes it more or less likely. And then we have the final element, which is what seals the deal, which is the social element. And that one is a very powerful one, and the one connected to social media. It's not just social media, but connected to social media as well. And that's the one that if you recognize people in the early days of starting to question their beliefs, you can save them. If you wait until they get into the social component, that's going to be very, very tough, maybe even impossible. So let's think a little bit about the social element. There's this beautiful research on what's called ostracism. And the story goes that this researcher described how he goes to the park with his dog, and he walks along the path, and there are two people playing frisbee, and all of a sudden the frisbee falls next to his feet. He picks it up, he throws it to one of them, and to his surprise, the person throws it back to him. And the three of them play for a few minutes. And after a few minutes of playing, they stop throwing it to him, and they just play between the two of them. And he describes how he felt rejected. And he went back to the lab, and he was wondering about this feeling of rejection. And he basically created an experiment that mimicked that process. So imagine that you're invited to the lab. As you come, you say, well, we need you to wait a few minutes outside. So you're waiting outside for a few minutes, and there are two other people. And you don't know it, but the two other people are actually working for the researcher. And there's a ball, and they start tossing it between the three of them. And for half the participants, they play between the three of them for 10 minutes. For the other half, they play for 5 minutes between the three of them, but then they stop throwing it to you and they just toss it between the two of them. So now they've replicated. One group feels included, one feels ostracized. Not a big deal, right? Only 5 minutes of not getting the ball. And then they check what are the downstream consequences of that. And it turns out they're quite devastating. People have a general decrease in well-being. People feel less optimistic about life. People are less generous to others, less likely to help. Lots of bad things happen even with a short experience of being ostracized. And if you take this into something like people starting to adopt misbeliefs, I don't know about you, but I recognize that in my past, I was not as empathic as I could have been. And I think that sometimes without intention, I ostracize people. So I think I made fun of them. I challenged them in some, maybe not the nicest ways. And, if you tell us a joke about somebody who's just starting their way into misbelief, you think that you're telling this little joke, but they experience it as a big thing. And, during COVID, we did a lot of that. During COVID, Macron said that people who are not vaccinated are not French. I mean, there was some big statement, but even in small ways, we make fun of people, we question them, and it's very understandable, but it's very counterproductive. If we think about stress and resilience, we want to provide support and not take people at the weakest. I'm sorry, I'm going back for a second. One of the things to understand is it's not these people and us. It's human nature. And the adoption of misbeliefs are not for nothing. These misbeliefs are an answer to a real psychological need, right? If you think about what we said about stress, it's not people are just saying, oh, I want to start believing in X, Y, or Z. No, they have a deep need to find an answer. They have a deep need for a villain. And once you understand this, then you want to say, I don't want to push these people even further. I want to help them figure it out. So the first step in that is not to ostracize them, which is so easy to do. What are we expecting in Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner and New Year Eve? As families get together with different political opinions and different beliefs and misbeliefs. And, I think it's very, very tempting to challenge and question and make fun of people with different beliefs. But the fact is that any step like this that we take is pushing people down too much, and we need to fight very hard with our instincts and to do the opposite.
What are you, nuts? Or what are you, these type of things you're saying pushes people further into their misbelief. Yeah. Can we sum this up, or at least try to tie a bow around this funnel? And I was trying to think of an example, but when you started at the top of the funnel, what is the start?
The start is stress.
Stress.
start
Okay.
with stress. So,
Because I have stress
scarcity
underneath
mindset
that.
is connected to it, but it's
Got
stress.
it. Got it. So there's some event, some trauma, whatever, pandemic, lockdowns, something. There's some stress, and then that is a catalyst to search for an answer. Is that right?
Right.
So now I'm pissed off, or stressed. What is going on? I don't get this. I don't understand what's happening. And so then they go down the rabbit hole, and depending on their personality, states of mind, you mentioned narcissism, but there are other personality traits. You're kind of, if you're not careful, you're primed. We're all susceptible.
Yeah.
And then let's say they find a little bit of information, and forgive me of my take on this, but they find a little bit of information that kind of gives them a little bit of an answer. They go further and further. They get rewarded. Hey, the world is flat. Watch this video. Now I'm rewarded. I knew something was going on. Why are they hiding this? So I'm just trying to kind of paint the picture of how somebody starts from zero into.
And it's not just that the world is flat; it's that they're hiding it from us, and there's some intention. Behind
there's
it,
a big picture behind the whole thing.
That's right, because the world is flat is not just the world is flat, but that the reality that we think we see is not really that reality.
Terrible. I don't think it was a great
it's
example. Well, I know example. The COVID and a vaccine that has some kind of magnet in it that you're going to be tracked. Yeah. That's probably.
Right. But now let's take the social element and continue with the flat.
I can find first off, I'm thinking I find a tribe of other people that believe this. Now I belong. Now I fit. That's where my head goes.
So you go to dinner with your family member and you say, hey, I started looking at this flat earth and I think there might be something there, and they make fun of you. Okay, so now you feel bad and you go online. And online, as you said, you can find a group that believes in almost anything. And not only that, but now you feel loved and supported. Just kind of to give a story of that.
People aren't going to laugh at me if they're in that group and I'm a part of the group. They're not laughing. They're not treating me like my fan. Go ahead.
So there was a guy who wrote a post about me. These people believe that there will be Nuremberg 2.0 trials. Nuremberg trials were for the Nazis after Second World War, and they thought there'll be Nuremberg 2.0.
Is grandiosity a hallmark of these kind of things? Because
I think so. So. So they said that there will be these Nuremberg 2.0 trials, and one guy wrote a long post about my role in that and why I need to be in those trials, and he ended his post with the question of whether I should get life in prison or public hanging for my crimes against humanity. And there were about 1,000 people who responded, and they all congratulated him on his clarity of thought and quality of writing, and there were lots of loves and all kinds of wonderful things. And if you just read for the tone, these were just some of the most loving people I've ever seen. the support. And again, if we take the psychological perspective that things are not the way they are for nothing, they are there as a reaction to some real need. These groups are wonderfully supportive for each other. And they need to be like this. Why? Because they need to compensate for the lack of support people are getting outside. Now, who wants to spend time with family members who are questioning your intelligence compared to this other group who are saying wonderful thing no matter what you said?
This is striking me. Based on what you're saying, is it important for us not to abandon someone or kick them to the curb? Because that's what I would want to do. If I'm hearing something crazy, I'm going to dismiss this person. I don't want anything to do with them. And it sounds like that may make it worse.
That's right. Exactly.
So
I think in the book, one of the
because that's happening all over the place, Dan. I mean, that seems like a sensible thing to do, but it may be counterproductive.
Yeah. And it's very hard. I use the term hug a misbeliever. It's very hard. It's very hard to get somebody who says some crazy stuff and to recognize that what we need to do is to have empathy for them. We need to understand that this is a response to some something that has happened that is that are trying to find an answer, that are probably stressed and so on. And our obligation is, first of all, not to push them further and give them support. Absolutely, incredibly important. There's another complexity of this is that, okay, so I'm in this group now and they love me and they care about me and so on, but I want to say something that shows my loyalty and my leadership and so on. So what do? I do something a bit more extreme, because if you just say the normal stuff, you're just a normal person. But if you want to show your real loyalty, then you say something a bit extreme and a bit crazy.
Explain that to me. Why is heterodoxy so attractive to people? Do they think it's outside the box thinking or some creativity?
So I'll tell you what I think it is. Do you remember the story from the Bible about Shibboleth? Okay, so there's a story about these two tribes. I think it was Ephraim and Gad, who were fighting. They had a bloody war. And at the end of the war, they settled on these two sides of the river. And after the war, they were wandering around. And when they met people, they wanted to know if they were from their tribe or the opposite tribe. And there's a plant called Shibboleth that the two tribes pronounced it in a different way. One of them said Shibboleth and one of them said Siboleth. So now you would meet people and say, what's the name of this plant? And if they said it the way that you said it, they're one of ours, we can get them to live. And if they said it the way the other tribe said it, we will try to kill them. Now, when they asked people, what's the name of this plant? They didn't really care about the name of the plant. They cared about the pronunciation as a signal for identity. And I think that one of the things that we see more and more in politics is exactly that people are saying crazy things. They don't really mean them as facts. They mean them as shibboleth. They mean them
signals.
As saying
it's a form of
signal of identity. Look what a loyal Republican am. Look what a loyal Democrat.
I'm not the establishment.
I'm not the establishment. And you have to be crazy because now it says, oh my, but you're signaling. You're not talking about the truth. Now, I wish I could take these people as they say it and bring them to an FBI interrogation and figure out how long do they understand that this was shibboleth and when they start believing in their own, because I think after saying it multiple times, they start believing it sometimes. But at least for a while, I think it's pure shibboleth. It's basically pure signaling of loyalty. This is a terrible thing because, when somebody is using communication to signal identity, but the people who are listening think that they're telling the truth, there's a very, very confusing thing there.
Could you say that again? Could you say it one more time?
So if I'm on national television and I'm, saying something that is shibboleth,
okay,
and I don't really mean it, but my audience doesn't understand this. They think I'm actually telling the truth. Now we're in trouble.
Now you have audience capture.
Now we have audience that doesn't understand what's happening. And it's not, by the way, just in politics. It has this style of communication has penetrated to lots of things. I listened on the app that people can go into rooms and discuss, and this was a discussion about, it doesn't matter. But somebody described an experience that she had and how terrible it was and how she was attacked and so on. And later on, when somebody asked her, she said, it wasn't really me. I was just describing it as if it was me. But, she made up an experience and she described it as if it's her in a very, very intense way to make up a point. But she never had that experience. But she felt perfectly okay to describe something that didn't happen to her in first person as if it happened to her until somebody asked her directly to make the point. So we do all of this, but there's one more part that I don't want to miss. So we said that on the social part, we have the ostracism, we have the love, we have the need to express ourselves and become leaders and get more extreme. The last component, which is our inability to admit mistakes. So there's a term that everybody knows called cognitive dissonance. Even though everybody knows it, it's worthwhile to repeat very quickly. So the story of cognitive dissonance is that Festinger read about this woman many, many years ago who said that on a particular date in the winter, aliens will come, they will take her followers, and the earth will be destroyed. And Festinger was very curious, like what would happen the next day when the aliens don't come and the earth is not destroyed? What would happen to her followers? And he went with a couple of his buddies, and imagine that there are two types of followers, the die-hard followers and the non-so-die-hard followers. You would think that the die-hard followers, the one who sold their homes and said goodbye to their family and maybe donated all their money, will be really disappointed and they would leave the next day. And you would think that the not-so-die-hard followers would say, hey, we didn't really believe, we don't really care so much. The earth was destroyed, not destroyed. We still think she's a fine person. Let's keep on following her. But what Festinger predicted was that a die-hard follower would experience a cognitive dissonance between their actions, sold their homes, gave their money, said goodbye to everybody, and the fact that the earth did not got destroyed, and they would feel the need to change their beliefs. Because they invested so much, they couldn't say I was wrong. They would say, we were so right, and even strengthen their beliefs. And he said that the people who were so followers would say, okay, we thought maybe yes, maybe no, she's clearly not, let's go home. And he was right. The die-hard follower strengthened their belief. They started working harder to get more recruit and so on. And this is the idea that when we put a lot of effort into something, our commitment to it increases.
Yeah, I had Elliot Aronson and Carol Travers. I had them on, and this plays out in the world, and the people who predict Christ returning or the world's ending. Was it 2012? 2012 was a big thing. And even though these dates pass and nothing happens, these people are still part of those tribes and followers. And yeah,
that's right. And now think about what happens to people who've invested a lot of their time and social capital and so on in something, whether it's QAnon or whether it's, whatever it is, the earth is flat. What happens when it's over? Can they say, oh, you're wrong. Let's no, they can't say we're wrong. They have to shift things. So if you look at the people who thought that COVID was a pandemic, they're now shifting. They're shifting to being anti-climate change. They're shifting to anti-medicine. They're shifting to all kinds of things like that. Centralized government.
You're saying that there are groups of people, I'm just curious because I don't know this, who thought it was a pandemic, and maybe they've come to the view that, okay, maybe it wasn't, but it was something else or part of something else.
So it's not that they come to the conclusion that wasn't, but COVID is basically over. But they've invested so much in this new social structure and the new agenda. So now what they're saying is, it wasn't just COVID. COVID was just, you don't understand, but it was just a small part of the desire of the elite to take control. So it becomes a bigger and bigger topic, and they just move to the next one, right? Because if it was just COVID, then you say, oh, I don't believe in mandates for the vaccine or something, you would say, okay, it's done. Let's move to the next thing. But they can't say it's done. They can't say it was wrong. Even the people who said the moment there'll be vaccination, there'll be hundreds of thousands of bodies in the street from the vaccines. Even those people cannot say, oh, we were wrong. No, they were right, and we just don't see it yet. And it's just part of the global and so on. So, and by the way, we all have an inability to admit our mistakes. Again, when we say these things, it sounds like you say, oh, it's these people. No, it's all of us. It just shows in some ways in this experience, but now they're moving to other topics. And just as a thought, imagine that we had COVID 2023. How well set up are we to work together for some common cause? Or think about how well are we ready for the next election season. The bigger wrap, when I talk a little bit about my experience, I talk about the funnel of misbelief, but then the bigger topic, of course, is trust. And it popped up in our discussion multiple times because that's really the underlying thing, is that as people go down the funnel of misbelief, they lose trust. And they don't have to go all the way to become misbelievers. Every step that people take, they lose some trust in society. They lose some trust in the legal system, and they lose some trust in the police, and they lose some trust in the healthcare system, and they lose some trust in the government. And
hey, Dan, because you're a behavioral scientist, I think just to focus on the pandemic and COVID and our response, the CDC was in a pickle, right? Because everything was changing rapidly in the field and the ground. They didn't know what they didn't know at the time, and what they did know was always changing. In your view, because I'm thinking through, and I'm talking specifically about trust, because a lot of trust was broken because CDC would say one thing, then it wouldn't be true, and then they found out they were saying it. They were trying to motivate some behavior over here that they thought would be life-saving. It was an incredible pickle that they were in, and I always thought, well, why don't you just admit what you don't know when you don't know it? And then I keep thinking there's being straightforward would have worked somehow to engender trust. But I'm curious as to, as a behavioral scientist, what the CDC, if anything, could have done from a communication standpoint. I don't know if you thought about this. So if you haven't, let's just table it. But
so I think two things. One is I think that it would have been very good to admit not knowing.
So that's what I intuitively thought.
I agree with you. But I think it needs to be, look, here's the world. We don't know if it's A or B. We think it's A. We will know more. And as we know more, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
But
for right now, right. Yeah.
This is the recommendation. I think this would have been much better. I think they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to make things too complex. But
there was lives at stake. Lives are at stake. So there,
That's right. But the other thing that happened was that there was this cycle of mistrust when there were things that they did not want to say because they thought that the misbelievers will distort them. So they didn't say them. So
I hadn't thought about that. So they thought if we say this, it goes out, they're going to take a snippet of this or that. Oh my gosh. Jeez.
So imagine that we get a signal that there's more bleeding for women and the signs for side effects that have to do with the menstrual cycle. If we put it out, what use will the misbelievers do? The moment you have a cycle of mistrust, short-term thinking and long-term thinking diverge.
I'm mindful of the time, and I want to get to, because you've painted this pretty bleak picture. It's very interesting. You've given me glasses now that I can kind of see what's happening, why it's happening. But what do we do about it? You talk about in the book the dynamics of changing a belief, and I want you to address that. Would you mind if I tell you a story I just read in a video I just watched of a former conspiracy theorist who has reformed? And if you could pull out of this story for me, tell me what are the components of changing a belief that you see. Some of them seem obvious, but so I just happened to, I was on Twitter, X, whatever, and something came up on my feed, pretty prescient because you and I were going to have this conversation. A guy named Brett Lee. It was about 9/11, and there was a picture of the building, one of the buildings that came down or that was struck by airplanes. But the sun was shining. The sun was behind it, and the sun was setting a bit, and it shone through the building, and the windows were all open, and you could see two steel beams holding this structure up, and the floors being attached to the beams, which would show you from an architectural standpoint that if a plane hit those beams and they melted or degraded, the whole structure comes down. Now, the conspiracy theorists said the bombs were set off inside at various floors. And that's the only way a building like that could have fallen like a pancake down, compressed. This former conspiracy guy was like, every person who believes that needs to look at this picture. You could see mechanically how it's possible and what had really happened. Then I went down a rabbit hole of this guy, Brett. Who the heck is he? And then he tells a story of how he came out of his or abandoned his misbelief, however we want to say this. He just started questioning certain things, and it started with Sandy Hook. By the way, a lot of this I had no idea. These were conspiracies, whatever. But I guess Alex Jones and others said that Sandy Hook, those killings, those were actors. They're people, the crisis actors. And that started this person to reflect on, well, wait a minute. There was some incongruency within the conspiracies that he was believing. He was like, that doesn't match up with this over here and what have you. So it started with questioning. Then the election. So two things happened. Trump got elected and then Brexit happened. And this was interesting, Dan. He said that government officials, presidents and what have you aren't elected, they're selected. So they're chosen by the Illuminati or some group, right? And so Hillary was supposed to get in. She was picked, but he saw the power of voting, that it actually had an influence, and it actually caused Donald Trump to become president of the United States. That was a crack in his belief system. Mm-hmm. So then Brexit happened, because that wasn't supposed to happen, because it's supposed to be this unified European Commission or whatever, So slowly but surely, everything kind of fell apart from there. So does that story or any components of that story match the framework that you present about how to disentangle misbelief or?
Yeah. So this is a very unique, we need to understand much more the details, but very few people leave, first of all. So this is a unique story. And for somebody to say, oh, this picture would have convinced me, I think he doesn't recognize. I
thought when I looked at it, Dan, that I thought in today's world, people would have said AI created that image. Right.
That's right. The mind's ability to distort fact is very impressive. If you ask me, I would have loved to talk to him and truly understand what was the trigger. Like, obviously, at some point, he started realizing that the things might have been different. But what was that trigger would be very, very interesting. But yes, there could be triggers that get people to question things. But you need to understand that we ask a lot of people. We asked of them to leave their society, to leave the place that they feel comfortable. If I could talk to that person, I would try to understand what's happening to their stress, what's happening to their social support, and what happens on the information level. So, and my guess is that their stress has gone down. My guess is they maybe have a significant other who is very supporting them, or some social support that is very high.
That's interesting. He did say there was a partner. They isolated themselves from the conspiracy groups to kind of figure this out. Mm-hmm. So he was with a partner. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think it's tough. It's tough to do. It's tough to do, but it's good to know that it happens from time to time. But so, if we think about advice for all of us, so when I started working on this book, I thought I'll have a chapter on solutions. I don't. I have this section called Hopefully Helpful. And there are things we can all do. So we talked about not to ostracize people, give people social support. There are things we can do on the cognitive level to not argue with people, but to ask them to help us understand their view and get them to realize that this might be inconsistent. But we need to do other things as well as a society. We can't let people get away with shibboleth. We need to change how social media works. We need to change our information diet. I mean, there's all kinds of things we need to do. So it's not I wish there was a simple thing to do, but you said it's a pessimistic book, and it is a pessimistic book. But what I think we need to do is to wake up to the fact that this is a real big problem that is standing between us and progress. And as a country, as a society, we have to wake up, decide that this is sufficiently important, and tackle it from multiple angles. It's not just, let's help each other more. No, we need to do much more. We need to think about social media. We need to think about the press. We need to think about our politicians. We need to think about shibboleth. There's lots of things that we need to change.
It really struck me when you mentioned rejection and ostracizing people. And if I'm meeting somebody like that, and I dismiss them. I want them out of my life. But not only will that cause some rejection, possibly, maybe, of that person, but now, maybe not me, but somebody like me, now you have a rational person that is not in their life to bounce things off, to connect with, and to discuss these things. Now their world is smaller and smaller, or the conspiracy or misbelief world is larger and larger, right? I keep going back to, I'm thinking about what I can do, and that's one thing to be aware of before something goes too far. But outside of that, it's pretty discouraging.
There's one other trick that is worthwhile pointing out. This is called the illusion of explanatory depth. I looked at it by looking at flush toilets. So I brought people in and I said,
flush
do
toilets.
You understand?
Flush toilets.
Okay. Yeah. And I said, do you understand how a flush toilet works? I said, of course I do. And then I would say, okay, luckily for you, I have all the pieces. Please assemble one. Nobody can assemble them. And after that, I said, how much do you understand? Do you think now you understand flush toilet? People say, oh, I don't really understand it at all. This is true about lots of things. If you ask people how much you understand how a zipper works and how a locks work, how a computer works and how a virus works, people think they understand it. And then when you don't tell them anything new, you just say, explain to me how a zipper works. Go for it. I thought I understood it. Now that we go into the details, I don't understand it so well. It works, by the way, also with elections. When we ask people, oh, you said the elections were stolen. Help me understand exactly how is it stolen? We're in the process. And people start trying, and then they say, you know what, I'm not so sure. Now, when we try to argue with people, our tendency is usually to confront them. Oh, you think that climate change is real or not real? Here's evidence. But there are better questions. One of them is to say, what would it take to change your mind? And it's an amazing question, because all of a sudden you have to think carefully, right? Are you just dogmatic and you really are not going to change your mind anyway? Or what would it take? So that's one important thing. You're not attacking people. Say, hey, I understand you, but what would it take to change your mind? And then the second approach is to say, okay, explain to me how exactly this works. So you're saying that there's a G5 chip in the vaccine? Help me understand who exactly put it. Where's the battery? How is it signaling? Just help me understand how it works. And it's a very good strategy. It doesn't change people to abandon, but it basically gets people to be less clear about their preferences, about their beliefs, and more open-minded to the possibility that they might be wrong. It also creates a much better type of conversation.
I like it.
If I try to convince you, argue against you, you're arguing against me even before I finish the sentence. It's just not helpful. Sadly, it's not helpful. But this accepting approach of saying, okay, I trust you, but let's continue with your approach. What does it take to change your mind? Help me understand the mechanism that you're proposing in more detail. These are also helpful approaches to get people to be more open and change their mind.
I can even add to at least I found in your book, some things that I'm going to put in my arsenal, but I want to apply them to me here in a second and talk to you about. But you have some tests in the book, true false tests related to beliefs. They're very good in the sense that you not only ask if you believe something is true or false, but then you ask for a confidence level. Because that's something that kind of I would add to this thing is like, tell me what you believe. What is your confidence? So I know where they are on the spectrum, because I don't even think they probably don't know what their confidence level is or haven't reflected on that. Because, if it's 50%, there's wiggle room, right? So, if they're not 100, you're like, oh, maybe we can discuss this. But by the way, I took these tests. It was interesting because I had never sat down and asked myself, and because I want to make sure I know what I believe, Dan, and why I believe it. Because you also mentioned in the book about cognitive shortcuts. I do that all the time. A lot of it is in the form of heuristics with other people who I think are credible. I'm not saying that's bad, but I struggle with this whole thing of I will read something, Dan, and I comprehend it, but I don't know it. I comprehend it. I'm like, I get that. And I go on. But if you were to ask me about that particular thing that I just read, maybe for the first time, I don't know it. the way a toilet flushes. That's a great example. But we're time pressed, Dan. And so I'm trying not to be overloaded cognitively. So I take shortcuts and
Exactly.
all that.
We all do it. There's no other way to live without that. But it's also good from time to time to take stock of where are. So the book is really phrased around the misbelievers, but it's also good to question our own beliefs and to say which one of our beliefs are take the statement, what would it take to change your mind? And just take it to all kinds of things that we believe. And all of a sudden you say, there are some things I'm just not sure what it would take to change my mind. I'm so sure about it.
Well, you go even further. So just to give an example, one of the questions, COVID-19 is real, true, false. Mm-hmm. Okay. True. Confidence, 0 to 100, 100. But later after you have everybody do that, you go, now, why do you believe it's real? And that took a minute for me I finally did, but I was like, well, okay. Wow. I have to reflect. What is it that went into my inputs that came to that decision? Right. So,
and then you might say, you know what, maybe I'm not as sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not as sure about it. Yeah.
Is that type of questioning, is that one tool in a toolbox Absolutely. Of how do we overcome our own self-deception? We have to question ourselves. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. It's a good tool for other people, but it's also a very good tool for us.
Is there any other tools before we wrap up here like that?
So I think both of those is kind of interrogating deeper is one, which is just the one we did, right? How did you come to believe? And then what would it take to change your mind? Those are the two good cognitive tricks.
Do you believe in free will, Dan?
I don't believe that there's 100% free will. For sure not. But I do believe that there is some free will. And I think that the majority of our free will is in our design of the environment. Let me explain to you what I mean. I think that if I go to a buffet, my free will is very limited. The cookies and the French fries, and I'm going to make bad decisions if I go to
the will is entangled.
That's right. If I go. But I think that we have free will in whether we design the world like a buffet or whether we design the world in a way that is good for us. So I think that, if I see an ad for something that tempts me, I have limited self-will, but I don't have to do the ads. So I think that our ability to fight temptation is in the design of our environment. So for example, on my phone, I have no notifications. If the notifications will act, I will be distracted. I have no free will about that. But my free will is about turning all notifications off.
That is a great answer. And that's very instructional. It's positioning. Where do you start from, or what kind of position you're going to put yourself in? You could actually place yourself in a deterministic position that this is definitely going to happen. You put me in a room full of, Chocolate. Donuts, or whatever. Right.
That's right. If I came to you every morning with a fresh tray of donuts and croissants, you will be less healthy at the end of the year. But I don't have to do it, and you don't have to accept it. So we have more free will in deciding how to design our environment. But once we are in an environment, our free will is much more limited.
You're taking to account our predispositions and our biology in the whole 9 yards. That's interesting. So Dan, this has been fantastic. I need a book with solutions. You need to write that. How do we fix this? But you did give me, and hopefully my listeners, an understanding of what's happening and why it's happening. That's a start, right? That's a start. I've got one more question about motivation in your book, Payoff. And I have a note here, if you don't mind. You say, I've got a quote here, when we're in the midst of a task, we focus on the inherent joy of the task. But when we think about the same task in advance, we overfocus on intrinsic motivators, such as payment and bonuses. Can you, for me, explain that? What do I do with that quote? So is it just suggesting that there's discrepancy between anticipation and experience? And before I engage in a task, I'm going to overlook the intrinsic satisfaction of the task itself?
Okay, so it means two different things when we design things for other people than when we design it for ourselves. So when we design things for other people, we over-focus on the extrinsic motivation. Oh, we have these people working with us. What do they really want? They want money, so let's pay them this way and this way and this way. We don't understand much the intrinsic value. And therefore, we give people the wrong rewards. We don't set up things the right way. But it's also true for ourselves. Like, let's say let's take running as an example. I don't know what exercise you do, but let's just take running. When you think about running in advance, you say, oh, it's about waking up and it's about getting dressed and it's about and so on. And what you can't internalize is that 5 minutes into it, you'll be in a different mode. Or you say to yourself, writing, oh, I need to. What you don't understand is that 5 minutes into it, especially if you're in a state of flow, you will just enjoy it for what it is. So what happened is that I think for other people, we design more extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. We focus more on salaries and bonuses than about reducing bureaucracy and giving people the conditions to enjoy what they're doing.
Yeah, let's talk about like for myself. But what I took away, Dan, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that I've got to think less about the task prior to it. But is that too simple? Is that oversimplification?
No, it's great. It's basically saying when you'll start it, you will enjoy it more than you predict right now. It's very hard to say, okay, start writing, and in 20 minutes you will think about it differently than you're thinking about it now. It doesn't feel like it. Even when I said, even if you think about my half a beard, we said that we're not good in predicting long-term things. You can't predict now. Like you could say, oh, I'll start writing, the screen will be empty, the first sentence will be painful, and so on. We're not as good in predicting what will happen 15 minutes down, where we will come up with a beautiful sentence and we will enjoy writing it, or some ideas would flow. So
this is a liberating insight here.
It does say do, and enjoyment is likely to follow. Don't wait for enjoyment. Do, and enjoyment will follow more frequently than you think it would.
I love that, because I did this exercise called a pleasure predicting sheet. I have a spreadsheet. I don't do it because it's too much work, but I used to predict my enjoyment of something before I did it. And then I would go back after I did it and fill in what was my real enjoyment. It was usually always higher than my prediction. So you're absolutely right. But that is a hack. What you just said, I can take it and go in it.
Yep. And my guess is if you reflected on it within the experience, it will be even better. But of course, you don't want to stop the experience and reflect, but that's the idea.
Dan, thank you so much for coming in. This was great. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take care.
Cheers. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy. And the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.